Before enforcement can become effective, there must be a fundamental change of the way people think about war and peace. There must be a change of hearts and minds. And this will take time. In Germany, which had every reason in the world to regret what they had done, they began when Chancellor Adenauer, Konrad Adenauer, a devout Catholic, made a public speech in which he said, terrible crimes have been committed against the Jewish people by Germany, and that imposes upon us an obligation to try to make amends. This was a very courageous political statement on his part, taking into consideration that Germany at that time itself had been badly beaten and was hungry and without homes, etc. But with that opening, a number of Jewish organizations decided they have to sit down and negotiate the terms of any such agreement. I was approached by a representative of these organizations, and I had already agreed to set up an organization to recover the property which had been stolen by Germans from Jews, and where it was to return it to their rightful owners, and where it was not claimed because the owners were either dead or for one reason or another couldn't and didn't claim it, that would be recovered by me and the proceeds used for charitable purpose of the survivors. And it was called the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization because we were the successor to the previous owners, and it was heirless property. And that was written into Military Government Law number 59, so that as soon as the Nuremberg trials were over, and I was involved then in the subsequent trials, wrapping them up and sending the files to Washington and all the stuff like that, they asked me whether I would take over and be the director of that program to recover the heirless and unclaimed property. That was before there was any speech by Adenauer. And they said, we don't have enough money to deal with this, but we have enough for your salary for 6 months, my military salary, which was very low. And we don't think anything will come of it, but we think we have to try. I said, okay, I'll try. I asked my wife, we had been married in New York before we left for our honeymoon in Europe, for our brief honeymoon. And I told her this was the situation, and she said, well, how long did they say it'll take? I said, I estimate 2 years. Well, she said, I know you. If they estimate 2, you'll do it in 1 year. So how can you say no? I mean, to take the heirless property and use it for the benefit of survivors is such a noble cause that we can't say no. We'll stay another year. And so I named myself the Director General of the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization, believing that the Germans would be very impressed with both the director and the general. And I set about trying to hire staff. I was the whole organization. Well, here I have to mention something which will surprise some people, I'm sure. I went first to General Clay, who was then the commanding general. I said, General, I've just agreed to carry out this military government law, but I've only got 3 months to locate all the heirless and unclaimed Jewish property. I need an extension. I need additional time. He said, I can't give you additional time. He said, the Russians are breathing down my throat. He said, I don't know when they're going to come charging in here, and I don't need any of this sort of stuff hanging around here, and I don't want to extend it. I said, well, look, they can't ask the Jewish organizations to put money into this. They don't think anything is going to come of it. Can I borrow the money from occupation funds? He said, well, no, can I get the money, I asked, from the U.S. share of the occupation funds in Berlin? He said, That's quite an apartheid decision, and the French will never agree. The Russians certainly will never agree, and I don't think the English, British, really, I can't do it. I said, can I borrow the money then from the American portion, and I'll pay it back as soon as I get things back. He said, can I do that legally? I said, I have a memo in my pocket that says you can. He said, okay, I won't give you an extension. You go down and tell the finance guy that we want to get this thing moving as fast as possible. So I went down to see the finance guy, whom I knew from all. The Americans were a little colony of our own there. And I said, I've just come from the general, and I got to rush through a program. I need some money from occupation funds. He said, how much you need? I said, give me $1 million. That's like walking in and saying, give me $10 million. I need it. Okay, here. And I began. And no idea how to repay that. Well, when the money started coming in, it's a slight diversion, I'll come back in a moment to this story, I thought I was reporting to such distinguished Jewish charities as the American Joint Distribution Committee, and I said, look, I've got money's coming in, I promised to repay it. They said, yeah, but you didn't say when, did you? I said, no, I didn't, but, well, I'll go explain it to them. I'll tell them, look, we can't expect to take the money away from the survivors in order to repay a debt, which should have been paid by the Germans anyway, the cost of recovering the stolen properties. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got another $1 million from him. Then John McCloy came in as High Commissioner. I got another $1 million from him. I was borrowing money from occupation funds. Until one day, John McCloy, whom I got to know quite well because we had a lot of legal problems to have that operation, and he was at that time, the High Commissioner. And I went to him and I said, Mr. McCloy, I have promised to repay, and if you insist, I will repay it. But I don't think it's right. He said, why not? I said, because last week you gave back to a convicted war criminal, Alfred Krupp, $2 billion worth of assets which we had confiscated in the Nuremberg judgment against him. So McCloy paused for a minute. He had authorized that return of the property to them. He said, can I do it legally? I said, I have a memo in my pocket that says you can. He said, okay, the debt is canceled. Now, people have been jumping on John McCloy for not bombing Auschwitz, and I knew him quite well. I can tell you he was a key player in the whole restitution program. Not only did he forgive my operational expenses in millions of marks, but he was leaning on Adenauer every time we ran into a problem with the finance ministry of Germany, which said, no, we can't do that because it's going to be too expensive. And we were fighting them tooth and nail. McCloy would jump in with Marshall Plan funds and with forgiving my debt, which he took out of occupation funds. And he played a key role in the success, if you can call it success, of the compensation program for Nazi victims. And I was the Director General of that when it started. It morphed out into the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, which negotiated the treaty between the state of Germany, the state of Israel, which did not exist when the crimes occurred, and the Claims Conference that I represented, which was a new organization, a consolidation of other organizations, made a treaty with Germany. Never heard of a treaty between the German state was not existent either. It was West Germany and East Germany, so we were dealing with the West German government. And so I talked to him about the Jewish organizational complaints that he should have bombed the crematoria in Auschwitz. We knew where they were. We had airplanes flying over Auschwitz. And I said, look, Jewish organizations, or my employers, are all up in arms. They feel you should have bombed the crematoria in Auschwitz. He said, first of all, it wasn't my responsibility. He was in the War Department at that time. It was Rosenberg's responsibility, with the Jewish advisor on Jewish affairs to whoever was the president. And it wasn't my responsibility. Besides, he said, it would have been a mistake to do that. It would have to be done by low-flying aircraft, which were British. We had a division of labor. We had the high-flying aircraft, they had the low-flying. They would have to do it through low-flying aircraft, and they would not be prone to do that because low-flying aircraft can be shot down. And I doubt if the British would agree to that. And high-flying aircraft were not that precise because we'd be aiming for the crematorium and we hit the barracks. What happens then? Headlines: American planes are bombing the Jews in the barracks of Auschwitz. He said it would have been a disaster, not only for the United States, but for the Jewish community, the inmates themselves. Besides which, he said, that wouldn't help. You know from your Einsatzgruppen, they would have stopped the trains, get them, everybody out of the trains, machine gun them before they get to the camp, machine them all along the way. It would have been easy for them to do that. And so the proposal they were asking me to do would have been a mistake. And he convinced me, and I said, look, I'd like to invite the Jewish organizations to have a meeting with you, which will be recorded, in which we openly debate this issue. He said, no. He said, I'm not going to defend myself. They can do and think whatever they like. I'm not going to put myself on trial to satisfy their mistaken judgments. And so we never had it. When McCloy came to write his memoirs, and he did when he was past 90, and I was in touch with him all the time. I was at his 90th birthday party. So was Henry Kissinger, who came from the same town where my children were born, outside of Nuremberg first. McCloy called me up one day. I had been consulting with him in connection with his memoirs. And he said, you know that stuff about you borrowing the money from occupation funds, and you talked me into waiving the debt? I said, yeah, I know that. He said, I could have gone to jail for that. I said, I know, but I would have gone with you. And we both sort of chuckled a little bit because we had done the right thing. And so I mentioned this in passing as the other things which are going on, and I'm leading to something. The German government, I was the director of 3 organizations: the Jewish Restitution Successor Organization for the Heirless and Unclaimed Jewish Property, the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, which negotiated the terms of the treaty. I had a staff of very good German Jewish lawyers who were helped working on that. Guys like Lemkin. He was not on the staff, but I had other, people there who were working with Lemkin. And I also set up a legal aid society to help the victims with their claims, because it was very complicated. You had to say where you were, what illness did you have, how was it treated, who else, etc., were your witnesses, and all that. And that was known as the United Restitution Organization. So I had 3 organizations which I was directing. The United Restitution Organization with offices in 19 different countries. The total staff for these operations was over 1,000 people, about 1,200 people in Israel, for example, I had office in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. The United States had office in New York and Los Angeles and Baltimore, and I think I had one in Miami for a while. So these were things which the victims know nothing about, really. And they were very critical of all of us who were involved in it. I mean, I left it after a while because I could see that it would not be finished within the 10 years which was anticipated when the laws were enacted. They thought it should finish it in 10 years. And when I left to go into what I thought was private practice, because I didn't want my children raised in Germany, they had already received over 50 billion marks and are receiving money to this day. Every Nazi victim, Jews and non-Jews alike, were the beneficiaries of those laws, enacted on the initiative first of Eisenhower, of Adenauer, then taken up. The president of the Jewish organization was Nahum Goldman. He is also dead now. and a small staff of dedicated people who were seeking justice and law. So much for that. Now, what does it become of interest? We were talking about my getting medals and how I appreciated very few of them. One of them was this path they named after me, and another one was a surprise call. The German embassy called me up one day and said, "We would like to give you our highest civilian award, Verdienstkreuz Erste Klasse," as they said in German, the Order of Merit First Class. I said, "Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you soon." And I did. And my hesitation arose. I wanted to talk to some of the Jewish organizations of survivors of the concentration camps. And I set up those meetings. I knew them all because I had been running all the programs, which incidentally, a whole three programs. My salary, I couldn't feed my family on it. There was one salary for the three organizations. So I became a victim of something or other. I had to go home because I had 4 kids and I had to go. Anyway, just a moment. I met with the organizations, and I received, as I expected, a response from some of them saying, "Are you crazy? You're going to sit down with the Germans? You're going to let them give you a medal after they killed my parents? What the hell do you think you're doing? You know, we'll kill you and kill the rest of them." When the negotiations were going on, there was a group of terrorists who were determined to kill us. The negotiations took place in the Kastel und Wassenaar in The Hague, very almost opposite from where the court now stands, walking distance from the court. And those were the negotiations to negotiate the terms of a reparations agreement, as it's called, between Israel, the Claims Conference, and the West German government. And the survivors who were the beneficiaries of that, some of them said, "You can't do that, you can't talk to them." And they set up a terrorist group to kill us. And this was repeated when I came to accept the medal. To get rid of the terrorist group, we wanted tight security. The Dutch police, German police, I don't know if we had American Secret Service men or not, but the leader of one of the leaders of the Israeli terrorist group was Menachem Begin, who became the Prime Minister of Israel and won the Nobel Peace Prize. Who do you call a terrorist? Today's terrorist is tomorrow's hero, right? So they shift me back down to Ferencz. Ferencz is there, and I'm telling the inmates, look, they want to give me their highest civilian award. What should I do? And they say, spit on them, throw it back in their face. And I said, I won't. I'm going to take it. You know why I'm going to take it? This is their way of saying I'm sorry. I never, in all my experience in Germany while I was there, met a German who said, I'm sorry. And this was their way of Adenauer saying, I'm sorry, and pointing it out, and of their foreign ministry saying, by picking this guy who sent some of our leaders to the gallows and who pushed us on all the restitution programs and jammed it down our throat, we want to honor him to show them that we think he was right. And it's a new generation speaking to me, and I said, I'm going to accept it for the new generation, and I did. So the facts are not generally known. Another important consideration is the view of the German industrialists. I wrote a book published by Harvard University Press called Less Than Slaves. It got a rave review in the New York Times book review section. And it told the details of the following story. It seemed to me, after the war, that bearing in mind that Krupp, a convicted war criminal, had been given back all of his assets, that the companies who were working people to death owed something to the survivors. It was a simple principle of law, which I learned at Harvard. I should have known it and probably did before. Tort law, they call it. if somebody does an injury to another one, which is unearned injury, he has an obligation morally and legally to try to make amends. It happens you run somebody over. You have to pick them up. You have to try to take them to a hospital. You have to pay them for the damages. And relying on that universal principle of law and morality, I felt that the German industry, specific companies, should pay some compensation to the people they were working to death. And they kept working them until they died. And they couldn't work anymore, then they sent them down the block to the crematorium. And I saw that in action. So I felt very strongly about that. IG Farben, for example, the makers of Bayer aspirin, also made the poison gas used in the gas chambers. And Krupp, of course, was a big munitions maker who personally directed, this was the son, Alfred, who was on trial in Nuremberg, directed that the inmates should be sent back to Buchenwald rather than being liberated, knowing, I should have known, that they would there be killed. And he said, let's not ship them back, or let's ship them back. He wanted to send them back. Instead, they were liberated in Essen, where his headquarters were. So these industrialists, in my judgment, had dirty hands, filthy hands. And I went to them and I said, you owe something to the survivors. And they said, who, me? Huh? We didn't do anything. Well, there was a war going on, didn't you know? And everybody was treated the same. They were treated the same as German people. Everybody had to work hard. There wasn't much food for anybody. It's, too bad. I mean, couldn't expect us to treat the Jews any better than we treated our own workers, did you? And give me arguments like that. To which my response was, and you'll pardon the army language, bullshit. But they refused to pay. And I kept hammering away, and they were getting public relations guys. The commander of the Jewish war veterans was on their payroll, General Julius Klein, all now deceased, publishing stories of cartel with a conscience, how they're going to do something, for their former victims. And I tried to get the Union of German Industries to make a global settlement for all industry. They absolutely refused at that time. And I sued them in all the courts. We went right up to the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, and every single court. We sued the hell out of them. I was using local German Jewish lawyers. When local, they came back from Israel, from wherever they had been. We were winning some cases, losing most of them. We got finally to the German Supreme Court. They said, no, it's too late. That can only be dealt with in a reparations treaty after the war is over. And there is a treaty. There will never be a treaty because Germany was split, and they knew that damn well. So they gave us a very rough time. And one day, something interesting happened. Mr. Alfred Krupp, who was the Minister for Armaments, who had been sentenced to 20 years in prison, Spandau prison in Berlin, was released. He had served his term. I knew Spandau prison. I'd been there. It was a rough prison. It was divided between the four powers. Berlin, they each took turns. When the American and British terms were on, when the Russian terms were on, they knew they were prisoners. They didn't treat them the same soft gloves. Anyway, I wanted to talk to him. I arranged to meet him secretly in the Frankfurt airport. And I thought, well, he's liable to tell me, hey, Jew boy, I served my 20 years. What do you want from me? Whatever it is, lump it. I thought I might get that kind of response. He had written a couple of best-selling books while he was in prison. He had shown some remorse in those books, and that encouraged me to go and talk to him. And I talked to him, and I said, I've read your books, and you know what happened. And they deny everything. I have your letters, the ones you received, asking you to assign laborers to them. I have their complaints, their assurances that they could build a camp so that they couldn't escape, their assurance they wouldn't be overfed. their continued requests for more labor, etc. And they say no, everything was normal. I said, how do you explain that? I have the proof to the contrary from your documents. He said, they're lying. I said, can I quote you? He said, yes. I said, all right, I will send you a manuscript. If there's anything wrong in any way, change it. I want to be absolutely correct. And I did. And I sent him the manuscript. On every page, he wrote, einverstanden, agreed, 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 agreed. So he earned his place as a German who said he was sorry. And I think our trying to paint them all with one brush is a mistake. I can understand it emotionally, of course, especially what I've seen, in action. But it would be a mistake. And so that also contributed to my accepting the German Verdienstkreuz, their Medal of Merit. The knowledge that they were trying, and they think they still are trying today to make amends.
If you're in a jurisdiction that requires a verification code, please write the following code word down. Theoretical. Theoretical. Theoretical.
The fundamental difficulty with enforcing international law is that we do not have the institutions which are necessary to carry out the decision of any courts. As long as that deficiency exists, we will not be able to be successful in having international law generally applied as we hoped for in Nuremberg. The idea that law must apply equally to everyone, including those who sat in judgment, has in fact been repudiated by those who sat in judgment. They have made no steps at all toward creating an institution which not only has fair judges representing different sexes, different views, different political views, different geographic locations, charged with responsibility for settling disputes, but they have left it to the parties themselves to settle it. Well, if Party A has a dispute with Party B, and only A or B can settle it, then the only answer is they can only settle it by the use of force. So we have built into the system the things we're complaining about. You haven't given them any other tools to avoid it. You have written in the Charter of the United Nations 10 different methods of settlement, by arbitration, by conciliation, by compromise, by this and by that. It's there spelled out. But they have taken no steps in order to carry it out. The International Court of Justice, which exists in The Hague, where they have my Ferencz pod now, in the street named after me around the courthouse. They're only bound by that court if they agree to go to the court and agree in advance to accept the judgment. Well, that's a sort of an arbitration court. It's nothing to enforce something against parties, both of whom feel very strongly that they are right. And when a person is willing to kill and die for his own cause, you cannot threaten him with imprisonment. We have not really learned that you cannot kill an ideology with a gun. And so we keep on trying to do that. It's a mistake. It cannot be done. And there are so many other things which would seem to be obvious, and we never apply them. And it should certainly be more obvious that law is a better solution than war. How much more horrible can war get? We have the capacity today to cut off the electrical grid from cyberspace. I was about 10 years ago meeting in St. Petersburg, Russia, with an American general, and we were the only two Americans there. It was one discussing peace or something like that. And we were having breakfast, and I said, General, what are you working on? And he said, well, I'm working on the cyberspace problem. I said, well, cyberspace problem, what's that? I had no idea. I can talk about it now because whatever I'm going to tell you has long been in the public domain. So he said, we now have the capacity to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. And I paused, and I was a bit shocked. And I said, no, I didn't know that. You mean you can just cut off the electrical grid? He said, yes. I said, well, how long would it take for everybody to be dead? I said, when I was hanging people, I learned that in 6 to 8 minutes hanging, you're dead. How long would it take to be killed if they cut off the electrical grid? He said, well, I'm not familiar with any studies being made of that subject, but it would largely depend upon the amount of water they had accessible, And this is it. So I walked away from there and said, everything has changed. Nobody's going to use a nuclear weapon. It's a big fuss and a muss and a bust. They don't even know what to do with the waste. They just don't know what to do with them. They built this monster. But if they can do it from cyberspace, no fuss, no muss, they just say goodbye, Chicago, goodbye, Washington, cut up the grid, cut the whole country out. What happens then? What happens to you? What happens to you? The students who are out there trying to make a living, the students that are out there trying to defend the United States, they're all going to be killed. That's the present situation today. And what are you doing about it? You're waiting to see if it happens? It's too late. You are already very vulnerable. Things have changed enormously, and they have changed for reasons which are quite obvious, should be quite obvious. I think I may have something in my pocket. No, I don't at the moment. But the little cell phone, that little phone that I carry around with me, that's going to change the whole world. Because in no time, everybody will be watching the same music, listening to the same speeches. Everybody will be literate. It may take 10, 20, 50 years, something like that. But by that time, surely 50 years from now, there's differences in educational level will be largely eliminated. We may all be crazy by that time. That's possible. But basically, this will help create a unity of all the inhabitants on this small planet. I don't know why this small planet should have life on it and hundreds of thousands of other planets have no life on it. I don't understand that. And it's beyond my comprehension as it was beyond Einstein's comprehension. But that's the nature of the world in which we live. It's a world in constant flux. And what was possible was prohibited years ago. First, the Indians couldn't use a poison arrow. That would be a violation of rules of war. You couldn't drop a bomb from a Zeppelin into the trenches in World War I. It was a crime. These are not crimes today. I mean, no one would have such things. You're not supposed to shoot people in the back. In Vietnam, Lieutenant Calley calls into headquarters and he says, I've got a bunch of people laying in a ditch there, women and children. They're gooks, what should I do with them? I say, wipe them out. Okay. They kill them all. Where's the responsibility? Where has the United States said we're going to pay those we murdered in Vietnam? No. Nobody wants to hear about that. They may make some secret deals here and there and keep it hush, hush, hush. The Japanese, but they're comfort women. Who? Comfort women. They were comfortable. Comfortable? Every Japanese diplomat I see, ask your wife, how was she comfortable with she feels? She got raped 20 times every day by strange soldiers. Ask her how comfortable it would be. And you don't even acknowledge that it happened. Well, shame on you. Shame on you. You'll never live it down. And I attacked them. The poor guys, I always apologize first. I say, look, I assume that you're not personally involved and not personally responsible. But I have to tell you something. You represent Japan, and I want to tell you something. Your behavior in connection with the comfort women, so-called, is a disgrace. You will never live it down until you've done at least what the Germans have done. Acknowledge it, apologize, try to save the girls, give them something to restore them while some of them still alive. Who, me? No, I have to take it up, so-and-so. So the world is full of illegalities, immoral things, horrible things. But all of that will work itself out should we survive that long. And I think it's up to the young people to say, hell no, we won't go. They said that to the president in Vietnam, and you know who went? Not the young people, the president went. So we have a situation where the young people who are the victims. The first victims are the soldiers and the sailors and those in the military. And I told them, and I've lectured at West Point, as I have on several occasions at the Air Force Academy as well. I do what I do because I don't like to see them coming home in body bags, and I don't like to see them coming home with parts missing. And I don't know any way to protect them other than eliminating war itself. And it's such a horrible thing. And it should be obvious that law is better than war. Even if you get a bad decision on any issue, it's better than war itself. America is a great democracy, and it's inevitable that there will be differences of opinion on many serious political questions. And that's as it should be. I feel very indebted to the United States for the opportunities it gave me as a poor immigrant boy to do all the things I've been able to do. Whatever savings I have made in my life, and I've lived a very modest life, I am giving back to the United States. I'm in the process of doing that now in my 98th year, on the assumption that I'm probably not going to be hanging around here very much longer. But there are certain things which give me pause. For example, I recently replayed the speech which President Trump made to the United Nations. Of course, I wish every president of the United States a good and successful and happy life. It's not an easy job. It's a very difficult job. And what gave me pause was in his reference to the situation now in North Korea. He was mocking the president of North Korea with various names, but there was one sentence which I wrote down because it disturbed me. If the United States is forced to defend itself or its allies, it would have no choice but to destroy North Korea. End quote. I don't know how you destroy a country. Does that mean you kill all of the inhabitants, as the Einsatzgruppen did, if they were Jews or Gypsies or other undesirables? Do you shoot all the children, one shot at a time? Do you chop up the country into 1,000 pieces, try to sell parts? How do you destroy a country? But I do know that anybody hearing the sentence saying, if you do something or other and we don't like it, and you threaten us, we'll destroy you and the whole country, that's going to scare a lot of people all around the world. And it will not be in the interest of the United States to have us viewed as a belligerent bully who is trying to impose unreasonable conditions on other governments in a democratic world. And that concerns me no end, because I know the destructive power of warfare. And it leads me again and again and again to one conclusion. There's only one way to end the poverty which drives people to acts of terrorism and the fear and the need for a job and the need for taking care of their family. And they don't have it today because the money is being drained off in useless billions of dollars every day in an arms race designed to kill more people instead of to help more people. What kind of a world is that? And I hope the President of the United States and all those political supporters on whom we depend for more rational and humane legislation will rethink that and begin to move toward a system of effective law enforcement through independent agencies competent to carry out the job objectively and fairly for everyone. That is my goal. The time has come to put an end to war making as a tool of diplomacy or of living. You cannot live in a peaceful world where some nations, some groups, whatever they are, you must hold the individuals personally accountable for their wrongdoing. It's not a matter of nations or ISIS or another name or any other group. It's a people who commit the crimes, and it's the people who must be deterred by being held accountable criminally in court, by being held accountable financially for whatever there are financial losses, by rethinking and retraining the hearts and minds of the public generally. Compromise is not cowardice. You need the courage not to be discouraged. If you can do that and recognize the other fellow's point of view and try to find some acceptable middle ground, you can still have a peaceful world and a peaceful universe. War makes murderers out of otherwise decent people. It's up to our preachers and our teachers to change the hearts and minds of people who are now prepared to turn to armed force to obtain their goals. They must learn compassion and consideration and compromise and all of the other ways of peacefully trying to understand the other fellow's point of view and to go as far as you possibly can so that you need not turn to force in order to prevail. Because if you do not prevail and you do not have such changes, you're going to continue the conflicts which now prevail throughout the world and endanger everyone. The desire for peace is a universal aspiration. It's not something which belongs only to the Americans or to the Chinese or to the Russians or to all of the other small countries. It belongs to every human being. The notion of state sovereignty, absolute state sovereignty, is absolutely obsolete. Sovereignty belongs not to a distant sovereign. It belongs to the people. Let us listen to the people. Let us know what they need and what they desire and what they're ready to do and work for. And I'm sure that we can lead them then to a more peaceful and a more humane world. So my slogan, since people love to live by slogans, is law, not war. Remember, law, not war. And I also give everybody 3 pieces of my best advice. And 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3, I hear it, never give up. Good luck to you all. Ben Ferencz signing off.